All right, grade 7. So we're going to start chapter 5, probability. And in this chapter, we've got 5 sections. 5.1 is probability. 5.2 is organizing outcomes. 5.3 is probabilities of simple independent events. Then we'll have a quiz. Then we'll deal with 5.4, applications of independent events. 5.5 is conduct probability experiments. Then we'll do some review and follow up with a unit test. So let's start with 5.1. So we're going to start with some definitions in 5.1, and we'll start with probability. Probability is the chance of an event happening. So for example, if you flip a coin, there's a 1 in 2 chance that you will flip heads. This means that there's a 50% probability that you will flip heads. Now, with probability, we can write it as a percent. We can do it as a fraction. We can do it as a ratio. We can even do it as a decimal, actually. Now, another term that we need to know is outcome. And an outcome is one possible result of an experiment. So when you're flipping a coin, heads is a possible outcome, tails is a possible outcome. A favorable outcome is a successful result in an experiment. So if you're flipping a coin and you call heads, then heads would be considered the favorable outcome. So let's have a look at a situation where we've got a spinner. And on the spinner there's 5 sections, and each section has a letter from the word skate on it, S-K-A-T-E. And the question here is, what is the probability of spinning an A? Now to do that, we write the answer as a fraction, a ratio, and a percent. And we know that there's 5 sections on the spinner, and they're each labeled with a letter, so there are 5 possible outcomes. And those outcomes are S, K, A, T, or E. Now, the question was, what is the probability of spinning an A? So that becomes our favorable outcome. Our favorable outcome is spinning an A. Now, to calculate probability, there's actually a formula. And this formula is probability is equal to your favorable outcomes divided by your possible outcomes. And we can write probability of A like this, with a big P, and then A is your favorable outcome that we've got in brackets. So that's a short way of writing the probability of A happening. So that's a notation you need to understand. So the probability of A is the number of A's on the spinner divided by the total number of outcomes, or the number of letters on this spinner. So on here we've got an S, K, A, T, and E. There's only one A on this wheel. If we had multiple A's, that would change things, but there's only one on this wheel. So the number of A's becomes 1. The total number of letters, as we've already said, S, K, A, T, E, there's 5. And that includes the A. All possibilities, there's 5. So 1 divided by 5 gives you your probability of spinning an A. So if you do that as a decimal, it's 0.2. So you've got a 0.2 chance of spinning an A. We can write that as a percent by multiplying that decimal by 100, because that's what we do to change a decimal to a percent, is multiply it by 100. And when we do that, we're moving the decimal over 2 spots, so it ends up being 20%. So there's a 20% chance of spinning an A on our spinner. So you can say that the probability of spinning an A is 1 over 5. You can use a ratio, and we haven't talked about ratios this year, but we can say it's 1 to 5. So 1 out of 5 chances of spinning an A. And as it shows here, 1 out of 5 as a ratio is just written as 1, and that's a colon, 2 dots, and then a 5. And then as we calculated, you can also say that it's a 20% chance. So that's your first example. Here's another example. Again, same spinner, S-K-A-T-E. Skate. What is the probability of spinning a Z? So let's look at the possible outcomes. S, K, A, T, and E. That means there's 5 possible outcomes. Z is not one of those. So that means there are 0 favorable outcomes. Which means our formula, favorable outcomes divided by possible outcomes, becomes this. The probability of spinning a Z is equal to the number of Zs divided by the total number of letters. Well, we said there were 0 Zs, but 5 letters, so it's 0 over 5, which is equal to 0, so it's a 0%. As a ratio, it would be 0 to 5. When we're talking about a ratio, the way we read this is 1 to 5. The colon becomes the word 2, T-O. So it's 1 to 5. Down here it would be a 0 to 5 ratio. When you've got a 0% chance of something, that's called an impossible event. It is impossible to spin a Z on this spinner. So there's some of the basics of probability. Now you've got a show you know to work on. Please go ahead and do that.